So often, caregiving in 2024 is presented as this binary, especially the work of mothering. It's either the most important and life-giving thing, or it's tedious and relentless and a fast track to irrelevance from the public sphere. In other words, it is hard to be cool and a mom. Or at least that's how it sometimes can feel to me. Like being really enthusiastic about caregiving is this political identifier that can flatten how complicated and, yes, relentless this work can be. And it's hard to talk about it in detail because caregiving is this thing that happens mostly in private as we tend to our loved ones who need help, our babies, our kids, disabled and or aging adults. This work has historically been led and managed by women with little fanfare and with lots of denigration. And while there's lots of conversations about time management for parents and caregivers or hot takes on the best way to do it all, I haven't really come across a close look at how caregiving doesn't just take from us, but also how it transforms us. Until I saw this new book by Elissa Strauss called When You Care: The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others. For today's episode, Elissa and I dig in about how she noticed herself changing through caregiving in profound and exciting ways. And this is just the start of an extended look at caregiving, unpaid and paid, on our show. In fact, for an upcoming episode with your stories, we want to hear from those of you who have been paid caregivers. I've depended on paid caregivers for people I've loved, most intimately my infants, when I returned to work after maternity leave. And I've had that complex relationship of watching a kind of love take root between my kids and their nanny, who came into our home and got to see very close up how everyone in the household was adjusting and managing the chaos of new parenthood. Alongside that, we had employer-employee conversations, how to handle sick days, vacation time. And we also went through a loss of when that intense period of collaborative caregiving let up, when my kids got a little older. It takes less money, but we all miss her desperately. So current and former paid caregivers out there, we want to hear from you. Was there a relationship with someone you cared for that stayed with you because of the depth of the bond or the strangeness of the circumstances? Record a voice memo or write an email and send it to us at deathsexmoney@slate.com. Tell us about the class dynamics that you noticed. How did you learn what to ask for as an employee? What wild things did you have to navigate? Did the amount you earned for caregiving feel fair or way too little for the amount of work you put in? And how would you describe the mix of feelings you've had for the people you cared for? If they were older and eventually died, where did your grief go? Or even if they just moved on to preschool, what have you made of these intimate relationships after they're over? Again, record a voice memo or write us an email and send it to us at deathsexmoney@slate.com. Before Elissa wrote her book about care, she wrote for years on caregiving from a policy angle about parental leave and pay for childcare workers. And it grew into this extended study of what happens when you are a caregiver. To talk about all that, I went over to her house in Oakland to see where she did all this work for her book and for her family.
Part of the reason I wanted to write this book is because I felt like it was hard to talk about motherhood the way I was experiencing it. It is just really hard to say, like, I like motherhood. I love motherhood in the framework of the conversations we have around motherhood.
This is Death, Sex, and Money, the show from Slate about the things we think about a lot and need to talk about more. I'm Anna Sale. We have had a lot of exciting new things to share with you about the show recently, but this might be some of our biggest news yet. Death, Sex, and Money is officially going to be live in New York City at the Tribeca Festival on June 11th. And I want to personally invite you to the live taping we'll be doing with the legendary journalist Kara Swisher. If you know Kara's work, you know her ability to get people to tell her things is unmatched. And she does it in her signature hard-charging way. She's not afraid of things getting a little combustible. I have a slightly different interview style, so we're going to talk about that and play around with that in experimental ways that I think will make this a special show unlike any of our other live shows up to this point. And it's not often that I get to do a live Death, Sex, and Money show in New York, so I really hope to see you there. Whether you're in the city, on the East Coast, or just been looking for a reason to visit New York City, come on June 11th for this show. You can get tickets now at tribecafilm.com/deathsexmoney. We are so excited to see you there. Elissa Strauss is just a few years older than me and a few more years into life as a parent. Her first child was born in 2012, and just after her second was born, she moved from New York City to the Bay Area in California, as I did when I was first becoming a parent. Elissa now lives in Oakland. I was curious when I came into your home if there were going to be visual cues of active parenting, and it seems like, from what I can tell, your children are of an age where they don't immediately announce themselves with all of their crap on the floor and in the corners.
But also, you know, I cleaned up. I am someone who cleans up. But I feel like it's like no one admits they clean up anymore. Either you're like proud of your messy house, or it's like, oh, this is just how we live. And it's neither. It is absolutely neither. When I have guests coming to my home and it's an adult guest and I want to feel like I'm in an adult space, I clean up. So I want to say it loud and clear. I spent about 35 minutes this morning cleaning up to welcome Anna. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. That's not just picking up. That's like tidying 35 minutes.
So they are old. There's just less stuff everywhere as they get older and older. I mean, particularly my 11-year-old. There's very few objects that he plays with. It's books and imagination. And, you know, you could see the Pokemon cards there. So if you're looking for hard evidence, I do actually have children. Yeah.
But I really like that distinction you made that you do proudly want to declare that you clean up, because I feel like that's I feel like hospitality is a kind of care.
Yes.
As anyone who has caregiving duties knows, housekeeping is part of that heavy load. Dishes, laundry, cooking, tidying up after the work of daily life. But let me be clear, not all caregivers are good housekeepers. Case in point, me. I appreciate hospitality and care and being an inviting host, but a tidy home is not something I'm innately good at. My husband Arthur has patiently and sometimes impatiently taught me the value of not being messy. And this tug of war definitely ratcheted up after we had kids. The kind of house we kept and the kind of mother I was got wrapped up together. It was a lot all at once, that identity evolution on top of all the work of caring for an infant. For Elissa, the central question of early motherhood was, how do I do this without becoming the kind of woman who's really into being a mom? The working assumption for her was that the more you let motherhood take over who you were, the more that was lost.
If I was going to do a quick Google search of New York Times book reviews, motherhood novels of the last 2 years, almost all of them would be about women struggling in motherhood and feeling kind of suffocated by it.
The dreariness.
The dreariness, yeah.
The way it diminishes you.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a zero-sum game, and the outcome is that, right, it takes and doesn't give.
Elissa always knew she wanted to be a parent, but she was deeply skeptical of all the trappings of the motherhood industrial complex when she was becoming one. It was the early 2010s, and she was a freelance writer, writing strongly worded takes for feminist websites. like skeptical pieces on the in vogue practice among her peers of committing to natural childbirth and spending a lot of energy planning for a particular kind of birth setting and hiring a doula.
The shorthand way to explain this is that there are a lot of doulas out there and comment boards across the internet. They're like, why does Elissa hate doulas so much? Because I took I can now say in hindsight, all of my fear of like motherhood taking over my identity. I took all of that anger and fear and frustration that obviously has like deep roots that spread in all directions and has really nothing to do with doulas. I felt like it was making birth unnecessarily big. It was telling me that my birth had to be this most momentous moment in my life, that I had to spend so much time preparing for it, and that the outcome had to look a certain way, and that was a measure of who I was as a woman.
So against doulas. And then when you thought about...
Poor doulas. Real, I know many doulas now. Great, wonderful woman doing wonderful work.
But I can... So it was sort of like, do you think of that as I'm holding a line here about parts of myself that I'm not going to let change with parenthood?
Exactly. I think it was kind of like, I'll do this thing. And I did. I had no ambivalence about having children. And I wasn't scared of the parent-child relationship. But I was really scared that motherhood would take over who I was, both kind of externally and internally at the same time. And it's kind of hard to articulate that out. But it was very real to me that like I could love my kid and we're going to do this thing and it's going to be great, but it's not going to like eat into everything else that I do. And most of all, that everything else being my work.
When you were feeling that, when you were a mother of a young child and you were trying to sort of figure out what kind of mom you fit in with, what were some of the lines you drew early on?
For me, birth was not this like pivotal moment, and nor was early parenthood, because it was like any insecurity, like new parenthood is extremely difficult. And I did not produce much breast milk. My older son, I went through all of the things. I felt like my house was like some kind of laboratory, and there were so many tubes and devices everywhere, and everything had to be sterilized nonstop. So right, to have like for me, it felt like doing that in the company of other moms would just make it worse because. And I think partially because I had decided like there's like I was almost like conspiracy thinking, right? You know, that there's like this like in Brooklyn, if you're not like breastfeeding nonstop and baby wearing nonstop, everyone's gonna think you're a horrible mom, and it was an easy scapegoat in a way for all of my insecurities about this identity transition, just to draw that clear line. So for me, a new moms group is like round zero of this conspiracy, you know, of people just shaming themselves because they're not mothering in one way or the other, falling like right into this trap, really, again, is how I thought of it.
This is how Elissa remembers her first several months of parenthood, as a time of overwhelm and, crucially, not a bit of ambivalence about being a parent, but a lot of careful policing of how she related to other mothers. There was this restaurant in Brooklyn where Elissa would bring her baby during its quiet lunch service, and it became the perfect place for her to check in with her pre-motherhood self.
And I went 1 week. I had the great fortune of it being totally empty and having a waitress that struck me as like a reasonable and kind human, at least in the moment. In fact, so reasonable and kind did I perceive her that when she offered to like just carry my baby, even though I didn't know her name or anything about her, so I could eat, I said, "Of course, yes, please." So she took Augie. He was out of sight, out of mind, and I ate my lunch in peace.
That just for a minute, that sounds glorious. Like I feel like when someone says, "Can I hold your baby so you can eat with both hands?" Like those are the moments of kindness that really I can remember so clearly from early parenthood.
Yeah. And we live in a culture where we don't have a lot of like intergenerational connection. So there's just a lot of people out there that had like that. I was one of them who had basically like never held a baby until they had a baby. So I think there's a lot of fear of babies, right? It's like, you know, you would say, can you hold my baby? In our culture, like for a lot of people, like, oh, I don't know what to do with the baby. What if the baby cries? God bless her. So when I returned back a week or so later, whatever it was,
it's like, this is me time.
and I think this is going to happen again. Like, so when I returned back the following week, it's loud and it's noisy because it was very, it had the kind of decor that was very trendy at the time, which is kind of like industrial with like a twist of like an antique French vibe. Echoes everywhere. And again, mostly empty, except for now me and Augie. And then a giant long table of a new moms group with their babies and they're talking and they're fussing. And to me, you know, kind of living the nightmare, you know, and I sat smug and thought that I had figured this out and they hadn't, and they were going to lose themselves to motherhood, and I was not.
So you looked at them with like suspicion and like, I need to not indulge whatever.
Yes.
If I feel envy of that community, I need to protect myself
Yes.
from indulging it. Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Early in her book, Elissa writes, when I became an active caregiver for the first time, I experienced a separation from the world I previously knew. I lost my independence. This became a crisis. She asks, who am I now that someone is attached to me? I remember this so well. The shocking rage that after a courtship and early marriage to a man that had a total egalitarian division of labor, we were weeks into parenthood and my husband could easily leave our cocoon of infant care to go meet up with someone for lunch, while I didn't really know how long I could safely be outside the house before I started literally leaking and my baby screamed out in starvation. This can feel like a threat, especially for a woman raised in the 80s and 90s, where we were socialized to believe that our individual achievements were the markers of progress for anyone who wasn't a man. But those accolades, they can be pretty narrowly defined. What about the achievements in our relationships that are cultivated and tended to with our families, with our kids, with our other loved ones? Elissa asks in her book. She writes, at root of all the tension surrounding care and women sits our inclination to separate the private and public sphere and our public and private selves. You write about the glass ceiling, and then you write about the concept of a glass door. Did you come up with that?
I did.
It's so brilliant.
Thank you. Because that was the one I like sent to friends. I'm like, is this terrible and hokey or is it actually pretty good? Thank you. I still am not sure. Yeah.
No, I'm into it because it's like the way it's something I have tried to articulate before, which is wanting to take seriously in my journalism the private sphere and the public sphere because of the ways that they interact with each other and, in fact, the ways that we treat the people in our intimate circles is really important.
Yeah.
When you came up with that idea of the glass, like what were you trying to get at? What were you trying to get at with the glass door?
Well, I think, right, so much of the feminism that I was responding to was the glass ceiling. You know, is kind of like there's up, women have to go up, right? We're ambitious, we break glass ceilings. And that's kind of the central metaphor of feminism as I knew it. And babies aren't good for breaking glass ceilings. They definitely will get in your way. So it felt like we needed another metaphor to think of the kind of work that needs to be done, and different feminists over history have tried to do, which is integrate our care selves and our public selves. And there's this notion that motherhood is cringe. I mean, you know, in some ways it's so silly. It's like, you know, why does this 44-year-old woman here even like think about being cool anymore. But there's something.
Well, because the fact is we are cool. So we just if we're misunderstood as uncool,
Yes.
it's a problem.
Yes, I think, right. Like cool is a deeper thing, right? It's feeling like it's being interesting to others, it's being relevant. And there's this sense, right? Like how can we take this spiritual and philosophical experience of care that happens inside and let it like flow into our work outside the house?
So the glass door isn't just permission to integrate our family lives into our public identities. It also makes this argument that what happens in our families is worthy of investment and public support. Coming up, another front for Elissa and how she thought about her choices around motherhood and work, feeling worthy when her earnings stopped keeping pace with her husband's.
I'm happy, like, being the part-ish time worker for periods of time and whatnot, but I am not okay with contributing to the wage gap, and that really burned.
This episode is brought to you by Fail Better, David Duchovny's new podcast with Limonada Media. On Fail Better, David, who has experienced both low and high-profile failures throughout his life, explores the vast world of failure, how it holds us back, propels us forward, and ultimately shapes our lives. Each week, he will chat with guests like Ben Stiller, Bette Midler, and more about how our perceived failures have actually been our biggest catalyst for growth, revelation, and even healing. Through these conversations, he hopes listeners can learn how to embrace the opportunity of failure and fail better together. Fail Better is out now wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is brought to you by Fail Better, David Duchovny's new podcast with Limonada Media. On Fail Better, David, who has experienced both low and high-profile failures throughout his life, explores the vast world of failure, how it holds us back, propels us forward, and ultimately shapes our lives. Each week, he will chat with guests like Ben Stiller, Bette Midler, and more about how our perceived failures have actually been our biggest catalysts for growth, revelation, even healing. Through these conversations, he hopes listeners can learn how to embrace the opportunity of failure and fail better together. Fail Better is out now wherever you get your podcasts. This is Death, Sex, and Money from Slate. I'm Anna Sale. As Elissa Strauss got more into mothering, she noticed her vigilance about protecting the non-mother parts of herself started to soften a bit, especially as her kids got old enough to speak. Getting to know them as she cared for them was creatively and intellectually stimulating. Plus, the pandemic collapsed a lot of compartmentalization, something that's continued in her working life as a mother.
In the strictest terms, I'm like the most stay-at-home mom. I never friggin' leave my house. I work here and then the kids come home. I look at these clothes in my closet. I'm like, I need two things here because I never leave my home because that's what really but I work.
Her husband also works from home, too. He's a fellow writer. He popped in during our midday recording to go write in the basement. When they became parents, he had the staff job with benefits, so he kept working full-time while she took leave, then built back up with flexible hours.
I both was absolutely okay with that inside our home, inside my life. I didn't need to feel like I had to be working 40 hours a week. I had been a freelancer for so long. I was very comfortable with a life where you work and then you don't work and you work at strange hours and these things all kind of roll together. But at the same time, I did have like immense guilt of just being like, oh, I'm like the wage gap problem. And I feel fine about my career, but if I think about it in terms of like, oh, wait, no, he makes more money. And if I see myself on a spreadsheet, like am I the problem?
It's interesting because it's like the wage gap is measuring what people are paid for work that's not unpaid caregiving. And so this idea that you're somehow letting down the cause by being the wage gap even when you're actually okay with the experience. Like you didn't feel diminished by being the more flexible parent,
right.
But on paper, then you were like, oh shoot, I accidentally became the wage gap.
Yeah. I have a chapter on economics of care in my book. And one of the most satisfying parts of writing that chapter was when I sat and like took all this data of like if we actually valued care economically and what that would actually mean in monetary terms, and then figured out what that meant in our household. I was like, we make the same. We're the same, you know? And I don't think like we certainly don't live in a household where he makes more financial decisions because he makes more money or anything like that. But just knowing that felt so good and so right. And it's, you know, it's one of the, it is not simple advice. I'm like, what kind of advice do you want to give to new moms? I'd be like, you're not the wage gap. We just don't value care. You know, it's like, it'd be really, really niche advice, but I think it's the kind of thing, like, it's such an eye-opening moment, or at least it was for me, to understand that like so much of how I saw myself and the way I viewed care and motherhood as a threat, like really is something that's actually coming from the deep system of what's this GDP thing and how do we come about it? And which economists are counting what, and, you know, what gets on the ledger. And it's, you know, that was the real conspiracy. It wasn't the doula, as it turned out. It's the GDP, you know, but seriously, and, you know, and everything else. It was, that's what was devaluing care.
Devaluing care, not counting it as worthy of monetary value, which is also part of the reason paid caregivers' wages can be so low. In a Care.com survey this year of state-by-state average wages for full-time in-home caregivers for seniors, no state cracked $24 an hour. For childcare workers, those who work at daycares or in private homes, the average salary last year was $14 an hour, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's not a lot to live on for the worker, even as childcare is already an overwhelming expense for many families.
For so many of us, it's more than we have. And then for so many of them, it's less than they can live on.
Totally.
And I mean, our care system is broken in this country. And that's an illustration of it.
And in your family's experience, has it primarily been you and your husband? Have you had extended family who's helped? Have you had paid caregivers? What's been the sort of ecosystem?
So we had paid caregivers help when the kids were little, both of them. And my parents were across the country, and my husband's parents were 5 hours north. So we didn't have extended family. So we had a single nanny, a woman named Carol, who was wonderful. And that was in New York City. She had nannied for a long time. So to be able to share care with someone that just had the confidence that comes with experience was just such a gift. And like that, like, balloon of anxiety that is constantly inflating when you're a new mom was deflated every time she came in the room. And then when we moved out here, we had younger nannies who brought a whole other energy and gave our kids so much. And I think that was also just like so glad my kids got to be exposed to these other caregivers, because I think they like grew from them, and I grew from them as a caregiver caring for the same children.
Watching her kids interact with their caregivers and with other people out in public also helped Elissa see her kids more clearly, which made caregiving more fun for her.
I think internally, the change really started to happen when my children learned to speak. And that's when they started becoming not just their own like fascinating singular consciousnesses, but also a mirror to who I was. I was more able to say, oh, I'm this person, but this is what they're receiving, and seeing the gaps between how I saw myself and how either the world was or others saw me. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really like a slow but pivotal moment. I think I remember taking my older son to like a taught music class, and he wouldn't sing. He would sit and observe every time. And on the way home, hearing him sing those songs out loud and being totally confused by it. I think I tried to encourage. I was like, you could sing there. You can do this. And that kind of being this like first moment where I felt a little stopped in my tracks, where it was, now this might blow you away, but things, things don't always go exactly how you want them to go in life. People have different ideas of how they should be than you do. Did I know this? Of course, I kind of knew this. But when it's your child, and it's a little bit your job to guide them through the world, but it's also your job to like sit back and respond to them and trying to figure out when you do one and when you do other. It's such a deeper, richer, for me at least, realization of like, oh, the way I see the world is not the only way to see the world. And I have to get out of the way a little bit to like really understand what he needs and who he is.
I love the way you say that, because it makes me think about so often for me, when motherhood feels the most relentless is where it feels just like this tight, this to-do list that I'm having to grip really tightly, this never ending. And what I hear you describing is, instead of like, this is an endless list of things I have to keep doing, it's instead like, look at this ride we're on together, like responsive and relational. And there's room for kind of awe, but man, when that to-do list is endless, it can be like,
it is. I mean, the days are long.
Like going back in between those two things that you have to do simultaneously, like respond and see them for who they are, and also guide and manage them.
Yeah.
Without, as you write about, like without sufficient breaks is when it gets the most. So many people don't have sufficient breaks.
Right. I think that's another thing I managed to convince myself of in this book, is like, when we view care as big instead of small, then it's like makes perfect sense that we need to get away from it sometime. And, if we compare it to any other kind of like mythically heroic tasks, whether it's, like hiking a really tall mountain or any kind of other endurance experience, there's like this idea that there would be like prep and breaks and conditioning and, finding like transition moments in that. It doesn't strike us as strange at all. But I feel like sometimes with care, if we keep it small, we don't think we need the reprieve when we really need the reprieve.
The first time Elissa felt that, not having enough of a break from caregiving, was actually pre-motherhood. Her parents divorced when she was in her 20s. It was a long, drawn-out unraveling, and Elissa was in the middle of it emotionally. Not being argued over, but being an emotional support to both her parents as they moved on separately. She became what she now calls a compulsive caregiver.
Someone who has to feels like it's on them to fix everything. That it's your job to like soothe the people around you, fix problems. It took realizing my limits as a mother to these children and helping like fix things for them or smooth over obstacles. I didn't realize how just silly it all was until having kids and seeing how just impossible. Like, no, like I cannot do that for anyone. I can't do that for myself. I feel very aware of it now, and I think it's helped me in my relationship with my adult parents, with my siblings. I mean, I think it was even like it happened in like one day, where like everyone's texting and someone's upset about this, and I was like, wait a minute, I don't have to fix this. I don't have to fix this. It really was like the light bulb, cartoonish, like epiphany moment. Let them fight. Like let everyone hate each other for 4 minutes. carry on, this isn't mine. And it was so liberating.
Did the amount that you have carried at times, whether for your family now or with your family of origin, did it ever express itself with like fury or resentment when you hit that limit?
So I think in my family of origin, because right now both of my parents don't need too much in the way of care, beyond regular phone check-ins. And because I'm one of 4 siblings, they're getting from, what sociologists call a distributed network of care. There's a lot of different people to care for them. In my home, my husband has had occasional struggles with depression, which has made me his caregiver, and also then a more intensive caregiver of my children. And that I've definitely, when he's going through a depressed period, I can reach the too much zone. Absolutely. That's one of those moments of you have to figure out how much you're communicating to your children and being honest with them because they want that and need that. And also protecting them from what they shouldn't know because they're not ready to handle it all.
In your life now, when you can feel it, that it's like a Tuesday and you need to tap out soon.
Yeah.
Like, what's the thing that you do where you're like, this fury might leak out in other places unless I do this thing to help.
Yeah. To handle the fury. I mean, largely because you can't always escape your kids, right? They live in the same home as you. I'll escape with them, which is actually quite effective for me. It's whether it's fuck it, we're going out to eat tonight, or we're, Trader Joe's frozen taquitos for everyone from the freezer. We're just watching a movie. I think just even this last Saturday, we just stayed in bed and watched Wizard of Oz. It's in... Not that that's this, not that that is this whoa, you really broke the mold there, Elissa, and rebelling against parenting norms by staying in bed. But just these minor moments, when I can't take it, we take it together because there's only, I can't always run out of the house. And, I think last year also when going through this moment when my husband was in a bit of a depressed period and then he started getting a little better. I did also return to New York City by myself, which is, my favorite place on earth. And I'm my kids will not suffer from it and I will only gain from it. And why would I ever feel guilty about that?
Ah, the sizzle of McDonald's sausage. It's enough to make you crave your favorite breakfasts. Enough to head over to McDonald's. Enough to make you really wish this commercial were scratch and sniff.
And if you're a sausage person, now get 2 satisfyingly savory sausage McGriddles, sausage biscuits, or sausage burritos for just $3.33. Or mix and match. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Hi, I'm Debbie Millman, and I host a podcast called Design Matters from the TED Audio Collective. Every episode, I have conversations with designers, writers, artists, and other luminaries of contemporary thought. People like Roman Mars, Ai Weiwei, Ethan Hawke, and Ashley Ford. We not only talk about their crafts, but how they design the arc of their lives, what they've learned, what obstacles they've overcome and how they've done it, and how they see the world. Join us for an inquiry into the broader world of creative culture. Find and follow Design Matters with Debbie Millman wherever you're listening to this.
We have had a lot of exciting new things to share with you about the show recently, but this might be some of our biggest news yet. Death, Sex, and Money is officially going to be live in New York City at the Tribeca Festival on June 11th. And I want to personally invite you to the live taping we'll be doing with the legendary journalist Kara Swisher. If you know Kara's work, you know her ability to get people to tell her things is unmatched. And she does it in her signature hard-charging way. She's not afraid of things getting a little combustible. I have a slightly different interview style, so we're going to talk about that and play around with that in experimental ways that I think will make this a special show unlike any of our other live shows up to this point. And it's not often that I get to do a live Death, Sex, and Money show in New York, so I really hope to see you there. Whether you're in the city, on the East Coast, or just been looking for a reason to visit New York City, come on June 11th for this show. You can get tickets now at tribecafilm.com/deathsexmoney. We are so excited to see you there. Elissa's kids are now 11 and 6. And during the school year, their weeks are full of activities and lessons. And then there's the dinner rush and bedtime prep and then good night. And then the whole family does it all over again.
Suddenly, I was like, oh, like I need something else to help structure time in my life, because now that I'm like, as a working mother, this just feels like there's just chaos. And so the Jewish ritual institution, even, you might call it, of the Sabbath, of like taking this day of rest, really seemed attractive to me all of a sudden, just as kind of an aspiration that we managed to achieve, to varying degrees week after week, is to protect a day. Friday nights, we have dinner together. And we have family dinner, almost every other night. But there's a different kind of intentionality, and just going through the rituals of saying the blessings, of slowing down. It's, it's ritual. It's ritual time for the family. And we use it as a chance to stop and connect. And it just helps me stay sane.
So sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, do you do domestic work during that time?
It's mostly like intuitive for what feels right for me. I try not to, but it's not because I think God will get mad at me. I don't to return to where we started, like cleaning might feel like rest for someone like me some days, but I don't generally do it. Generally the routine is like a Friday night dinner, go to a synagogue that has childcare and catered lunches for all, and sit with friends and talk while the kids play. No one has to cook and no one has to clean. And to have a little moment to dig into myself. It's time outside of competition. It's time outside of consumption. It's just like a break from all of that. And then in its place, a time to connect with like who I am, just to stop, have a moment for gratitude, have a moment to think a little more deeply about the things that I was too busy to think about during the week, and just to be with my kids, right? And without expecting from anything else from them. It's like a rejection of productivity culture for 24 hours.
Yeah, and an investment in community culture.
Yes, exactly.
This ancient tradition made her feel a part of something, less isolated in the work of caregiving, and also like she had a place to reflect on its meaning. This built on work she was doing as a writer, poking around in 20th century philosophy about the ethics of care. And this got Elissa thinking, what if the purpose of life wasn't all about development of the self?
That was actually really where this whole book started, was discovering this world of philosophy that dealt with care. And, I started reading these books and feeling like, oh my gosh, if I had had these, I was so busy with the doulas, and we all should have been reading this stuff. It's like, this is the conversation that needs to be had. This is like putting care at the center of a human experience in a way that I had never seen it done before. And really thinking about care as like our experiences of receiving care is like kind of if not the formative moral experience of our life. Like it's that first witnessing of goodness in another that it makes us aspire to goodness. I mean, that's where like the beauty of it is, like, to really try to understand what someone else's needs is like big, meaty work. It's not casual. And it requires your own internal journey of seeing your own blind spots. It helped clarify like what was happening, this kind of almost moral transformation. I mean, like, whoa, you can, like, we could get in there with care. There's a lot there.
Yeah, you sort of said this quickly, but the idea that giving and receiving care is a process that enables moral transformation is, I found it so profound and validating because it matches up the feeling you have of what it's like to be in deep love relationship with someone you're caring for and being cared for by. And it's taking that process seriously, as opposed to the language that you identify that we have around particularly mothers and care, which is we don't know how to talk about what it is that we're doing when we're doing it, or we talk about it as a season that's time off where we're not focusing on the things that get measured and valued because we're doing this other side work. And instead it makes it it's not just motherhood and it's not just parenthood. It's like, it's the central project of life, to learn and to study our experiences of giving and receiving care. And I just,
Such a nice way to put it.
Well, I was so surprised as I was reading this, I was like, why does this feel both countercultural and subversive and like the most basic idea ever? It felt both like I didn't know I needed this book, and it's interesting that I needed this book.
You know, I thought about care mostly in the context of these kind of obvious dependent relationships, where one human just depends on another, like my children are dependent on me and my husband. But seeing how care is actually like a dynamic and dependency, even if it's not like explicit dependency, there's like threads of this in all our relationships. There's layers of care. This comes up in couples therapy too with my husband, where, the therapist is like, you really have to think about care. And my husband and I are laughing because it's like, I read this whole book about care, but like, you see that like care is an inevitable dynamic that is going to continue to grow. And also in, relationships that we really think as being defined by their mutuality, like marriage, like care, to also honor like the moments of dependency and imbalance in those relationships, I think is really helpful as well.
That's Elissa Strauss. Her book is called When You Care: The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others. She also wrote a piece last month in Slate called It's Weird Times to Be a Happy Mother. We've linked to that in our show notes. This episode was produced by Daisy Rosario and me. Death, Sex, and Money is produced by Slate. Please support the production of our show by becoming a member of Slate Plus. You'll not only be supporting our work on Death, Sex, and Money, you'll get access to benefits, including listening to this show and all of the other great shows Slate makes, like Slow Burn and Dakota Ring, without any ads or sponsor breaks. Be a part of helping us build a solid foundation at Death, Sex, and Money's new home by subscribing to Slate Plus. Just click Try Free at the top of the Death, Sex, and Money show page on Apple Podcasts. Or if you listen somewhere else, go to slate.com/DSM Plus to get access wherever you listen. You'll be supporting the show and the people who make Death, Sex, and Money with me at Slate: Andrew Dunn, Zoe Azoulay, and Cameron Drews. Daisy Rosario is our senior supervising producer at Slate. Alicia Montgomery is Slate's head of audio. Our theme music is by the Reverend John DeLure and Steve Lewis. Find us and follow us on Instagram at Death, Sex, Money, and you can find my weekly newsletter at annasale.substack.com. You can reach us anytime with voice memos, pep talks, questions, critiques at our email address, deathsexmoney@slate.com. We love hearing from you. And remember, if you have been a paid caregiver, tell us some things that you've taken away from that work. Wild stories, observations about class, lessons about the ways you want your own loved ones to be cared for. Send us your thoughts and stories to deathsexmoney@slate.com. I'm Anna Sale, and this is Death, Sex, and Money from Slate. We have had a lot of exciting new things to share with you about the show recently, but this might be some of our biggest news yet. Death, Sex, and Money is officially going to be live in New York City at the Tribeca Festival on June 11th. And I want to personally invite you to the live taping we'll be doing with the legendary journalist Kara Swisher. If you know Kara's work, you know her ability to get people to tell her things is unmatched. And she does it in her signature hard-charging way. She's not afraid of things getting a little combustible. I have a slightly different interview style, so we're going to talk about that and play around with that in experimental ways that I think will make this a special show unlike any of our other live shows up to this point. And it's not often that I get to do a live Death, Sex, and Money show in New York, so I really hope to see you there. Whether you're in the city, on the East Coast, or just been looking for a reason to visit New York City, come on June 11th for this show. You can get tickets now at tribecafilm.com/deathsexmoney. We are so excited to see you there.